Sometimes the most dangerous predators wear the kindest faces. Deep in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon, where winter silence can drive men mad and secrets freeze as solid as the ground, 12-year-old Samuel Creek thought he knew every shadow and sound in his grandfather's territory. The old mine shafts, the forgotten logging roads, the places where civilization gave up and nature reclaimed its throne. All of it was his playground, his inheritance from a grandfather who'd taught him that survival meant trusting no one but yourself. But on that bitter February morning in 1987, Sam discovered something that would shatter everything he believed about safety, about family, and about the thin line between protector and predator. The woman's cries echoed from the darkness like a wounded animal, and when he found her, chained, pregnant, and speaking words he couldn't understand, he knew his childhood was over. What Sam didn't know was that his rescue attempt would draw the attention of Jakob Voss, a man whose gentle voice and concerned demeanor masked something far more sinister than the mountain boy could imagine. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sam's breath came in sharp puffs as he crouched at the edge of the old mine shaft, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The woman's voice had gone quiet now, but he could hear something else, a low, rhythmic moaning that made his skin crawl. He'd been tracking a wounded deer through the snow when the sounds first reached him, carried on the wind like something from one of Grandpa's war nightmares. The opening to Mine 7 was partially collapsed, just a black mouth in the mountainside that most people would walk right past. Sam had explored it once before, 2 summers ago, but only a few feet inside before the darkness and his grandfather's warnings about unstable tunnels had turned him back. Now, lying flat on his belly in the snow, he could see a faint glow deep within, not sunlight, but something artificial. "Hello?" he called out, his voice cracking. The sound echoed back at him, distorted. "Are you hurt?" The moaning stopped. Then came a voice, weak but urgent, speaking rapid Spanish. Sam caught maybe 1 word in 10 from his limited exposure to the language from an old radio station that sometimes reached their cabin. Por favor. Please dart ayuda. Help. Sam's grandfather had drilled into him the importance of preparation, of never entering any situation without an exit strategy and the right tools. But hearing that desperate voice, Sam made a decision that would have earned him a lecture about foolish risks. He pulled his flashlight from his pack and squeezed through the mine entrance. The tunnel stretched deeper than he remembered, and his boots crunched on loose gravel and debris. 20 feet in, 30. The beam of his flashlight danced across rotting timber supports and rusted equipment left behind by miners decades ago. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, and carried a smell that made him think of the animal den they'd cleaned out last spring. Musky and wrong. When he found her, Sam's first instinct was to run. The woman sat against the far wall of a natural chamber, barely visible in the glow of a battery-powered lantern that flickered weakly beside her. Heavy chains wrapped around her ankle, secured to an iron ring that someone had driven deep into the rock. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles around a face that might have been pretty if not for the exhaustion and fear etched into every line. But it was her swollen belly that made Sam's breath catch. She was hugely pregnant, far enough along that the baby could come any day. She looked up at him with wide, dark eyes and began speaking rapidly in Spanish, her hands reaching toward him in supplication. She was young, maybe not much older than the high school girls Sam sometimes saw when Grandpa took him to town for supplies. Younger than his mother had been when she died anyway. "I don't understand," Sam whispered, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I don't speak Spanish." The woman's face crumpled, but then she seemed to gather herself. She pointed to the chains, then to herself, then made a cutting motion with her hand. The meaning was clear enough. "Get me out of here." Sam knelt beside the heavy shackle around her ankle, examining the lock. It was solid, military grade, the kind of hardware his grandfather had taught him to recognize. This wasn't some rusty old mining equipment. Someone had put this here recently, and they'd meant for it to hold. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he knew she couldn't answer in a way he'd understand. She grabbed his wrist suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong, and spoke a single word that made his blood freeze. Voss. Sam had heard that name before, whispered between adults who thought he wasn't listening. Jakob Voss owned property deeper in the mountains, places where even the game wardens didn't venture. Grandpa had mentioned him exactly once, calling him the kind of man who makes the wilderness feel small, and Sam had understood from his grandfather's tone that this was someone to avoid. The woman was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She pressed Sam's hand to her belly, and he felt the baby move inside her, a strong kick against his palm that reminded him this wasn't just about one person anymore. "Okay," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice. "I'll help you, but I need tools. I need—" The sound of an engine echoed from somewhere outside the mine, distant but growing closer. The woman's eyes went wide with terror, and she began shaking her head frantically, pushing Sam toward the tunnel entrance. She spoke urgently, pointing first at him, then toward the exit, and though he couldn't understand the words, her meaning was crystal clear. "Hide. Run. He's coming." Sam's hands trembled as he switched off his flashlight, plunging them both into the weak glow of the dying lantern. In the sudden quiet, he could hear his grandfather's voice, echoing from 100 lessons. "Sometimes helping someone else is the fastest way to get yourself killed, boy. You remember that?" But as the engine sound grew louder, and the woman beside him whimpered in fear, Sam knew he was already too deep to turn back. The engine noise faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of Sam's ragged breathing and the woman's quiet sobs. He waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, his body pressed against the cold mine wall, every muscle coiled tight. When silence finally settled over the mountain like fresh snow, he squeezed the woman's hand once, a promise he hoped she understood, and made his way back through the tunnel. Outside, the winter afternoon was already bleeding toward evening. Sam's tracks in the snow told the story of his approach, clear as words on a page, and he spent precious minutes scuffing them out with a pine branch before heading home. His grandfather had taught him that survival often came down to the smallest details, the things most people never thought to notice. The cabin sat in a clearing 2 miles from Mine 7, smoke rising straight up from the chimney in the still air. It looked exactly as it had when Sam left that morning, weathered cedar logs chinked with moss, a metal roof green with age, windows that reflected the forest like closed eyes. Home. The only home he'd known since his mother died 5 years ago, since the state had decided that Edgar Creek, decorated Vietnam veteran and certified hermit, was somehow a better guardian for an orphaned 7-year-old than the foster system. They'd probably been right about that, Sam thought as he climbed the porch steps. His grandfather had kept him alive, taught him things most kids would never need to know: how to read weather in the movement of leaves, how to field dress a deer and preserve meat without refrigeration, how to disappear into forest so completely that someone could walk within 10 feet and never know you were there. But Edgar Creek had also taught him that the world outside their mountain was full of people who couldn't be trusted, authorities who would separate them if given the chance, and dangers that multiplied the moment you let your guard down. The old man's paranoia ran bone deep, carved there by whatever he'd seen in the jungles of Southeast Asia, and he'd passed it to Sam like a family heirloom. "You're late," Grandpa said when Sam pushed through the door. The old man sat at their small kitchen table, cleaning his rifle with the methodical precision of someone who'd performed the task 10,000 times. He didn't look up, but Sam knew those pale blue eyes missed nothing. "Deer get away from you?" "Lost the trail in the rocks near Widow Creek," Sam lied, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. The words came easily, too easily. When had he become someone who could lie to his grandfather without thinking twice? Edgar's hands never stopped moving, running the cleaning rod through the barrel with practiced strokes. "You remember to check your back trail?" "Yes, sir." "Good." The old man finally looked up, studying Sam's face with the intensity of someone reading a map. "You seem rattled, boy. Something spook you out there?" Sam felt heat rise in his cheeks. His grandfather could read him like fresh sign in mud. Every emotion, every thought seemed to leave tracks the old man could follow. Just frustrated about losing the deer. We could use the meat. We've got plenty of meat. Edgar set down the cleaning rod and leaned back in his chair. Jerky, canned venison, 3 rabbits in the cold storage. We're not starving, Sam. Not yet, anyway. The implication hung in the air between them. Not yet. As if it was only a matter of time before the outside world collapsed and left them truly isolated, dependent on nothing but what they could hunt, trap, or grow. Edgar Creek had been preparing for that collapse since before Sam was born, stockpiling supplies and skills like other people collected stamps. Sam moved to the wood stove and held out his hands to the heat, trying to stop the trembling that had nothing to do with cold. The routine of evening chores stretched ahead of him: help prepare dinner, check the radio for weather reports, study from the collection of textbooks that served as his education. A quiet life, a safe life, the kind of life his grandfather had built specifically to keep the rest of the world at arm's length. But now Sam had seen something that changed everything. A pregnant woman chained in a mine shaft, speaking a name that made his grandfather's shoulders tense whenever it was mentioned. Elena. He found himself thinking of her by the name scratched into the lantern base, though he had no proof that was even hers. She was out there right now, alone in the dark, waiting for help that might never come. "Grandpa," Sam said carefully, "what do you know about Jakob Voss?" Edgar's hands went still. When he looked up, his eyes held a wariness that Sam had learned to recognize. The same look he got when planes flew too low over their valley, or when unfamiliar vehicles appeared on the distant logging roads. Why? The single word carried the weight of 20 years' worth of carefully maintained isolation. Just wondering. Heard the name somewhere. "You stay away from Jakob Voss," Edgar said quietly. "You stay away from his property, his people, his business. That man is poison, Sam, the kind that seeps into everything it touches." Sam nodded, but inside he felt something shifting, breaking apart like ice in a spring thaw. His grandfather's warnings had always been enough before. Now they felt like chains of their own. That night, Sam lay awake, listening to his grandfather's restless movements in the next room. Edgar's PTSD manifested in bursts of insomnia that could last for days, and tonight the old floorboards creaked constantly under his pacing feet. Sam had learned to recognize the pattern. First came the pacing, then the muttering, then sometimes the screaming nightmares that left them both hollow-eyed come morning. But tonight was different. Tonight, Edgar's whispered words carried a name Sam had never heard him speak before: Elena. Sam pressed his ear to the thin wall that separated their bedrooms, straining to catch more. His grandfather's voice was barely audible, fragmented phrases that sounded almost like prayer. Should have, couldn't save, not again. Then, clearer, "Elena, I'm sorry." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. His grandfather knew her. Somehow, Edgar Creek knew the woman chained in Mine 7, and that knowledge was tearing him apart. Sam waited until the pacing stopped, until his grandfather's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep, before he made his decision. Moving with the silent precision Edgar had taught him, he slipped from his bed and gathered supplies in the darkness: his hunting knife, rope, a can of peaches from their pantry, the bolt cutters from the tool shed. If he couldn't break the lock, maybe he could cut through the chain itself. The night air bit at his exposed skin as he stepped onto the porch, but Sam welcomed the cold. It helped him think clearly, pushed away the confusion that had been building since he'd heard Elena's name on his grandfather's lips. The woman in the mine wasn't some random victim. She was connected to them somehow, part of whatever history Edgar had been running from all these years. Snow crunched softly under his boots as he made his way through the forest, following a route that would keep him hidden from the main trails. The half-moon provided enough light to navigate by, and Sam had walked these paths so many times he could have found his way blindfolded. Still, every shadow seemed to hold danger now. Every sound made him freeze and listen for approaching engines. It took him 40 minutes to reach Mine 7. The entrance yawned before him like an open grave, and for a moment Sam hesitated. His grandfather's warnings echoed in his memory, Trust no one. Help no one. The moment you get involved in other people's problems, you make their enemies yours. But Elena's terrified face haunted him, and the sound of his grandfather weeping her name had shattered something fundamental in Sam's understanding of the world. Edgar Creek, the man who had seemed invincible, was afraid. And if his grandfather was afraid, then Elena must be in worse danger than Sam had imagined. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness as he squeezed through the mine entrance. His footsteps echoed differently tonight, sharper somehow, as if the tunnel itself was listening. 20 feet in, 30, and then the chamber was empty. Sam's flashlight swept frantically across the space where Elena had been chained. The iron ring was still there, driven deep into the rock, but the chains lay coiled beside it like a shed skin. The battery lantern was gone. The smell of fear and confinement lingered, but Elena herself had vanished. "No," Sam whispered, dropping to his knees beside the abandoned shackles. His hands shook as he examined the lock, still intact, still functional. Someone had used a key to free her, but who, and where had they taken her? A sound from deeper in the mine made him freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from a passage Sam hadn't noticed before. He killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering so loud he was sure whoever was coming would hear it. The footsteps stopped just outside the chamber. Then came a voice, deep and gravelly, speaking with a slight accent Sam couldn't place. "I know you're in there, boy. Come out where I can see you." Sam held his breath, willing himself to become part of the rock wall. His grandfather had taught him how to disappear, how to become invisible even in open ground. But somehow, this man had known he was here. "Your grandfather sent you, didn't he?" The voice continued, and Sam caught something that might have been amusement in the tone. "Edgar Creek, the great protector, still fighting wars that ended 20 years ago." Light flooded the chamber as the man stepped into view, carrying a powerful electric lantern. He was huge, at least 6.5 feet tall, with a wild black beard and eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light like an animal's. This had to be Jakob Voss. Sam recognized him from his grandfather's descriptions, though Edgar had never mentioned how the man seemed to fill up space just by existing. "Where is she?" Sam asked, surprising himself by speaking. His voice cracked on the words, but he forced himself to meet Voss's stare. The big man smiled, revealing teeth like yellowed ivory. "Safe," he said simply. "Elena is safe now. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sam's mind raced, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The tunnel behind him stretched into darkness, but Voss blocked the only other passage out of the chamber. The man's presence seemed to suck the air from the space, making it hard to breathe. Everything in Sam's body screamed at him to run, but his grandfather's training held him in place. Never show fear to a predator. Never turn your back on something that could kill you. "Safe from what?" Sam managed, his voice stronger than he felt. The bolt cutters in his pack suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate against this mountain of a man. Voss chuckled, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. From herself, mostly. "Elena gets confused sometimes. The pregnancy, you understand. Hormones make women do dangerous things, make them think they need rescuing when what they really need is protection." The words felt wrong in ways Sam couldn't articulate. He thought of Elena's terrified face, the way she'd pushed him toward the exit when the engine approached. That hadn't been confusion. That had been someone who knew exactly what kind of danger she was in. "The chains," Sam said. Why was she chained up? For her own safety. Voss took a step closer, and Sam fought the urge to back away. She has episodes. Tries to wander off into the forest, especially at night. You know what this mountain does to people who aren't prepared for it. A pregnant woman, alone in the snow. She'd be dead within hours. It sounded reasonable. Almost believable. But Sam remembered the military-grade shackles, the fresh scratches around the lock that spoke of struggle, not willing compliance. His grandfather had taught him to read sign, and everything about that scene had screamed of captivity, not protection. "Where is she now?" Sam asked. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. Voss's eyes glittered in the lantern light. The real question, boy, is what brings you out here in the middle of the night? Edgar know you're wandering around my property. Your property? Sam had never heard of Voss owning the old mining claims, but then again, his grandfather kept a lot of information to himself. Still, something about the man's casual assumption of ownership made Sam's skin crawl. I was hunting, Sam lied, tracking a wounded deer. In the middle of the night, with bolt cutters in your pack? Voss's smile widened. You Creek men never were good liars. Too honest for your own good, both of you. The casual mention of the bolt cutters sent ice through Sam's veins. How could Voss know what was in his pack? Unless he'd been watching, following, waiting for exactly this moment. Your grandfather and I have history, Voss continued, settling his bulk against the chamber wall like he had all the time in the world. Did he ever tell you about Elena? About what happened before? Sam's mouth went dry. His grandfather's midnight whispers echoed in his memory. Elena, I'm sorry. Whatever had happened between Edgar and this woman, it was eating his grandfather alive with guilt. He doesn't tell me everything, Sam said carefully. Smart man. Some stories aren't fit for children. Voss studied Sam with predatory interest. But you're not really a child anymore, are you? 12 years old, living up here like some kind of mountain savage. When's the last time you saw another kid your age? Been to school? Talked to anyone besides that broken-down old soldier? Each question hit like a physical blow. Sam had always accepted his isolation as necessary, part of the price of safety his grandfather had built around them. But now, faced with Voss's casual cruelty, it felt less like protection and more like imprisonment. We do fine on our own, Sam said. I'm sure you do. Edgar taught you well. How to track, how to hunt, how to hide from the world. But he never taught you the most important lesson, did he? Voss leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Sometimes the thing you're hiding from is already inside the walls. Sam's hands trembled as confusion and fear warred in his chest. Nothing made sense anymore. His grandfather knew Elena, had whispered her name like a prayer or a curse. Voss claimed to be protecting her, but everything about the man radiated menace. And somewhere in the darkness, a pregnant woman waited while Sam stood paralyzed by doubt. I should go home, Sam said, taking a step toward the tunnel entrance. Yes, Voss agreed, not moving from his position. You should. And boy, next time you feel the urge to play hero, remember that some people can't be saved. Some people don't want to be saved. Your grandfather learned that lesson the hard way. Don't make his mistakes. The words followed Sam through the tunnel and out into the night air, where he finally allowed himself to run. Behind him, Voss's laughter echoed from the mine shaft, like the sound of something dark and hungry stirring in the depths of the mountain. Sam ran through the forest like something wild, branches tearing at his jacket, his breath coming in sharp bursts that turned to silver vapor in the cold air. Behind him, the mine entrance had swallowed Voss's laughter, but the sound still rang in his ears, predatory and knowing, as if the man understood something fundamental about Sam's world that Sam himself had never seen. He didn't slow down until he reached the familiar ridge that overlooked their cabin. Below, warm light leaked through the windows, and smoke still rose from the chimney in a straight line. Home looked exactly as he'd left it, but everything felt different now. The safety his grandfather had built around them suddenly seemed fragile as paper, a child's fortress that could be blown apart by the first strong wind. Sam crouched behind a stand of evergreens, studying the scene below with eyes his grandfather had trained to notice the smallest details. Nothing moved in the clearing. No unfamiliar tracks marked the snow around the cabin. But Voss's words echoed in his memory. Sometimes the thing you're hiding from is already inside the walls. What did that mean? And why did it feel like a threat? Sam waited another 10 minutes before approaching the cabin, using the route Edgar had taught him for returning unseen, along the creek bed where running water would mask any sound, then up through the deadfall on the north side where the shadows were deepest. By the time he reached the back door, His hands had stopped shaking, but his mind churned with questions that had no good answers. Inside, the cabin was silent. His grandfather's bedroom door stood open, revealing rumpled sheets and an empty space. Sam found Edgar in the kitchen, sitting at the table with his rifle across his knees and his pale eyes fixed on the front windows. "Couldn't sleep either?" Edgar asked, without turning around. His voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone who had given up on rest entirely. Sam hung his coat carefully on its peg, mind racing. Did his grandfather know he'd been gone? Edgar's senses were still sharp despite his age, honed by years of surviving in places where a moment's inattention meant death. It was possible he'd heard Sam leave, possible he'd been sitting here waiting for his return. "Bad dreams," Sam said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Yeah." Edgar's fingers drummed against the rifle stock. "They'll do that to you." Sam moved to the wood stove, adding fuel to keep the fire burning through what remained of the night. The familiar routine helped calm his nerves, but he could feel his grandfather's attention like a weight between his shoulder blades. Edgar was studying him, reading the signs Sam was trying so hard to hide. "Boy," his grandfather said quietly, "you want to tell me what's really going on?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sam stared into the flames, watching them dance around the fresh wood, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. For 5 years he'd told his grandfather everything, every thought, every fear, every discovery in their small world. Edgar had been his anchor, his teacher, his only connection to anything that mattered. But now Sam carried knowledge that felt too dangerous to share. Elena's terrified face. Voss's predatory smile, the certainty that his grandfather's careful isolation was built on secrets that could destroy them both. "Grandpa," Sam said slowly, "what happened to Elena?" Edgar went completely still. The rifle slipped from his hands and clattered against the table, but the old man didn't seem to notice. When he finally spoke, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "How do you know that name?" Sam turned from the fire to face his grandfather, and what he saw there made his heart skip. Edgar Creek, the man who had seemed invincible, looked suddenly ancient, hollowed out by guilt and memories that had been eating at him for years. This wasn't the controlled wariness Sam had seen before when uncomfortable topics arose. This was raw terror. "You said it," Sam told him. "Last night, when you couldn't sleep, you kept saying her name." Edgar buried his face in his hands. "Christ, I hoped." He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "Sam, there are things about our life here, about why we came to this mountain, that I never told you. Things I prayed you'd never need to know. Tell me now." The words came out stronger than Sam had expected, carrying a weight that surprised them both. This wasn't a child asking questions anymore. This was someone who had seen too much to accept easy lies or comfortable half-truths. Edgar studied his face for a long moment, and Sam saw the exact instant when his grandfather realized that the careful world he'd built was crumbling. The boy Edgar had protected and guided and tried to keep innocent was gone, replaced by someone who had stepped across a threshold into knowledge too dangerous to forget. "All right," Edgar said finally. "But once I tell you, there's no going back. No pretending you don't know. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Sam thought of Elena, alone somewhere in the darkness with Voss's idea of protection. He thought of the laughter echoing from the mine shaft and the certainty that doing nothing would haunt him forever. "I'm sure," he said, and meant it. Edgar stood slowly, his movements stiff with more than just age. He walked to the kitchen window and stared out into the pre-dawn darkness, one hand pressed against the glass like he was touching something Sam couldn't see. "Elena Vasquez," he said quietly, 22 years old, pregnant with her first child. I was supposed to protect her." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Sam waited, understanding instinctively that interrupting now would shatter whatever fragile resolve his grandfather had found. "This was 1984, Edgar continued. 3 years before we came up here. I was doing private security work down in California, bodyguard stuff mostly, rich people who thought they needed protection from shadows." His laugh held no humor. "Elena was different, though. She was a witness, federal case, human trafficking ring that moved girls up from Mexico, kept them in compounds in the mountains, used them for things I won't describe to you. Sam's stomach clenched. He thought of Elena's terrified eyes, the way she'd flinched from his touch. The FBI needed her testimony to bring down the whole network, Edgar said. Dozens of girls, Sam. Some of them not much older than you. Elena had escaped, but she was pregnant, scared, didn't speak much English. They needed someone to keep her safe until the trial. What happened? Edgar's reflection in the window looked like a ghost. I got careless. Started thinking of her as family instead of an assignment. She was so young, reminded me of your grandmother when we first met. I let my guard down for one afternoon, went to town for supplies, left her with a backup guard I'd worked with before. The silence stretched so long Sam thought his grandfather might not continue. Then Edgar turned from the window, and his face was carved with old pain. When I got back, they were both gone. The guard was dead, single bullet to the head, professional work. Elena's room looked like a tornado had hit it. Blood on the walls, furniture smashed, but no body. She was alive. The trafficking ring had found us. They took her back. Edgar's hands clenched into fists. Without her testimony, the case fell apart. Most of the bastards walked free. And Elena, she disappeared into that network like she'd never existed. Sam felt pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. But she's here now, on the mountain. That's impossible, Edgar said automatically. Then he stopped, really looking at Sam for the first time. Unless... The front door exploded inward with a crash that sent splinters flying across the room. Edgar spun, reaching for his rifle, but 3 men in winter camouflage were already inside, automatic weapons trained on both of them. The leader was compact and dangerous-looking, with pale scars across his neck and the kind of eyes that had seen too much killing. "Hands where we can see them," the man said conversationally. "Both of you." Edgar's rifle was 3 feet away, but it might as well have been on the moon. Sam raised his hands slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. These weren't local police or federal agents. Everything about them screamed military contractor, the kind of men who solved problems quietly and permanently. "Jakob sends his regards," the leader continued. "Says to tell you the old debts are coming due, Edgar. You cost him a lot of money 3 years ago. Time to balance the books." "Let the boy go," Edgar said. His voice was steady, but Sam could see the terror in his grandfather's eyes. "He's got nothing to do with this." "Oh, but he does." The leader smiled without warmth. "See, little Sammy here has been poking around where he shouldn't. Jakob doesn't like curious children. Bad for business." Sam's blood turned to ice. They'd been watching him, following his movements, probably since the first time he'd discovered the mine. His attempt to help Elena had painted a target on both of them. "Here's how this works," the leader said. "We're going to take a walk together, all of us. Up to the old mining camp where Jakob's waiting. Edgar's going to have a conversation about ancient history, and then we're going to solve some current problems." "And if we refuse?" Edgar asked. The leader's smile widened. "Then we burn this place down with both of you inside, and Jakob finds another way to clean up his mess. Your choice." Sam looked at his grandfather and saw the calculation happening behind Edgar's eyes, weighing odds, searching for advantages that didn't exist. 3 armed men in a confined space, no cover, no backup, no way out except the one they were being offered. "We'll come," Edgar said finally, "but I want your word the boy won't be harmed." "You're not in a position to negotiate terms," the leader replied. Something in his expression suggested he might honor the request anyway, if Edgar cooperated. "Move." As they were herded toward the shattered doorway, Edgar caught Sam's eye and mouthed a single word: "Run." But Sam knew there was nowhere left to run. The mountain that had sheltered them for 5 years had become a trap, and they were walking straight into its teeth. The forced march through the forest felt like walking toward execution. Sam's breath came in sharp puffs that dissipated quickly in the bitter air, each step taking them deeper into terrain that should have felt familiar, but now seemed alien and threatening. The three armed men moved with professional efficiency, two flanking their prisoners while the scarred leader took point, his weapon casually ready. Edgar walked beside Sam with the careful gait of someone cataloguing every detail, every possible advantage. His grandfather's eyes swept the landscape constantly, and Sam recognized the behavior from their hunting trips. Edgar was mapping escape routes, counting distances, calculating odds. But with automatic weapons trained on their backs and no cover for miles, those calculations kept coming up empty. "Stay close," Edgar murmured, during a brief moment when their captor's attention was focused on the trail ahead. "Whatever happens at the camp, whatever you see, remember that survival comes first. Everything else is secondary." Sam nodded, though his grandfather's words felt like abandonment. How could survival be secondary when Elena was somewhere up ahead, probably terrified and alone? When Jakob Voss was waiting with whatever twisted plans had brought them all to this point? The mining camp materialized through the trees like something from a nightmare. What had once been a legitimate operation in the 1940s now served as a fortress of corrugated metal buildings and razor wire. Generator lights cast harsh shadows across the compound, and Sam counted at least 6 more armed men patrolling the perimeter. This wasn't some hastily assembled operation. This was infrastructure, permanent and well-funded. "Impressive, isn't it?" the leader said, noticing Sam's wide-eyed assessment. "Jakob's built quite an enterprise up here. Remote location, no government oversight, plenty of natural barriers to keep curious folks away. Perfect place for specialized business ventures." The casual pride in the man's voice made Sam's stomach turn. Edgar had said the trafficking network was supposed to have been destroyed, but clearly it had just moved deeper underground, literally carving out a piece of the mountain for its operations. They were marched through the main gate and across a compound that bustled with activity despite the early hour. Men loaded supplies into vehicles, others maintained weapons, and through the windows of one building Sam caught a glimpse of what looked like medical equipment. Everything about the place screamed organized crime with military precision. Jakob Voss emerged from the largest building like a king greeting subjects. In the harsh artificial light, he seemed even more imposing than he had in the mine, a giant among armed men who themselves looked dangerous enough to stop Sam's heart. His smile was warm and welcoming, which somehow made him infinitely more terrifying. "Edgar Creek," Voss said, his voice carrying genuine pleasure. "It's been too long, old friend. You look well. Mountain living agrees with you. Jakob." Edgar's response was flat, emotionless. "Still in the same business, I see." "Business is booming, actually. Turns out there's always demand for our particular services, no matter how many times the government pretends to shut us down." Voss's gaze shifted to Sam, and his smile widened. "And this must be the famous grandson. Quite the little explorer, aren't you, boy?" Sam forced himself to meet Voss's eyes, though every instinct screamed at him to look away. "Where's Elena?" "Direct." "I like that." Voss clapped his massive hands together. "She's safe, comfortable, receiving excellent medical care, which is more than she had when you found her, wouldn't you say?" The implication hung in the air like poison. Voss was suggesting that Sam's interference had somehow endangered Elena, that her captivity was actually protection. The manipulation was so smooth, so reasonable-sounding, that for a moment Sam almost believed it. But then he remembered her terrified eyes, the way she'd pushed him toward safety even while chained to a wall. That wasn't the behavior of someone who felt protected. "I want to see her," Sam said. "Of course you do." Voss turned to Edgar, and his expression hardened. "But first, your grandfather and I need to discuss some unfinished business. 3 years of accumulated interest on a very large debt." Edgar straightened, and Sam saw something familiar in his grandfather's stance, the coiled readiness of a soldier preparing for combat. Despite their hopeless situation, despite the overwhelming odds, Edgar Creek wasn't planning to go quietly. "The debt was yours, not mine," Edgar said. "You lost Elena through your own stupidity. I just failed to keep her safe from you." "Semantics," Voss waved dismissively. The result was the same. Millions in lost revenue, dozens of assets scattered to the wind, federal attention we spent years redirecting, all because you couldn't do your job. The words hit Edgar like physical blows, and Sam watched his grandfather's careful composure crack slightly. The guilt Edgar carried wasn't just about losing Elena. It was about failing to protect all the other victims who had suffered because the trafficking network had survived. Voss stepped closer, close enough that Sam could smell his breath, see the predatory intelligence behind his eyes. "But I'm feeling generous tonight. Make this easy for everyone, and the boy walks away clean. Fight me, and he learns exactly what kind of business we really run here." The choice was no choice at all, and everyone knew it. But as Sam watched his grandfather's shoulders slump in defeat, he realized something that chilled him to the bone. Edgar Creek was preparing to sacrifice himself, and Sam was about to be truly alone for the first time in his life. Edgar's surrender lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. In the space between Voss's threat and Sam's mounting terror, something shifted in his grandfather's posture, a subtle redistribution of weight that Sam recognized from countless hunting expeditions. Edgar wasn't accepting defeat. He was buying time, positioning himself for one desperate gambit. "You want me?" Edgar said, his voice carrying the resignation Voss expected to hear. "Fine. But first, I need to know the boy understands what's happening here." "He deserves that much." Voss's smile widened, mistaking Edgar's request for capitulation. "By all means. Education is so important for the young." Edgar turned to face Sam directly, and in his grandfather's eyes, Sam saw a message that made his blood freeze. "Get ready to run." "Sam," Edgar said carefully, "everything I taught you about surviving in these mountains, remember it all. The emergency caches, the hidden trails, the safe places I showed you. Most importantly, remember that sometimes the only way to help someone is to live long enough to come back for them later." The words sounded like goodbye, and Sam felt something fracture inside his chest. "Grandpa, remember," Edgar insisted, then spun with shocking speed for a man his age. The scarred leader was 3 steps away, his weapon lowered in the false security of the moment. Edgar covered the distance before the man could react, tackling him with the full force of a body that had been hardened by war and wilderness. They went down together, rolling across the frozen ground as Edgar fought desperately for the automatic rifle. "Kill them both!" Voss roared, but his men hesitated for the crucial seconds it took to separate friend from enemy in the tangle of bodies. Edgar came up with the weapon, his face transformed into something Sam had never seen before. The expression of a soldier who had accepted death as the price of protecting what mattered most. The rifle chattered to life, muzzle flashes strobing across the compound as Edgar swept it toward the nearest threats. "Run, Sam, now!" Sam's paralysis shattered. He bolted toward the nearest building as chaos erupted around him, automatic weapons fire answering Edgar's desperate assault. Men shouted orders, boots pounded across frozen ground, and through it all, Sam could hear his grandfather's rifle continuing its deadly conversation with forces that vastly outnumbered him. Sam made it to the building's corner before a massive hand closed on his shoulder, spinning him around with irresistible force. Jakob Voss loomed over him, his face no longer wearing any pretense of civility. This was the predator Edgar had warned him about, stripped of disguise. "Stupid old man," Voss snarled, dragging Sam back toward the firefight. "Does he think this changes anything? All he's done is guarantee you'll watch him die." Sam struggled against Voss's grip, but it was like fighting a landslide. Behind them, Edgar's rifle had fallen silent. Whether from death or empty ammunition, Sam couldn't tell. The other weapons continued firing for several more seconds before stopping abruptly, leaving only the ringing echo of violence across the compound. "Bring him," Voss called to his men. "And what's left of the grandfather? Time for our young friend to learn what happens to people who cause problems." They dragged Sam across the compound to where Edgar lay motionless beside the building's entrance, his face pale but his chest still moving with shallow breaths. Blood seeped from wounds Sam couldn't identify in the harsh artificial light, but his grandfather's eyes were open and aware, fixed on Sam with an intensity that cut through the surrounding nightmare. Still alive, Voss observed with mock surprise. Tough old bastard. That's good. Means he can watch what comes next. Sam was forced to his knees beside Edgar, close enough to hear his grandfather's labored breathing, to see the pain Edgar was fighting to conceal. Everything about this moment violated the natural order Sam understood. Edgar was supposed to be invincible, the mountain was supposed to be safe, and evil was supposed to exist somewhere else, in the outside world they'd left behind. "Here's what's going to happen," Voss said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute control. "You're going to help me solve a problem, boy. Elena's been difficult since your interference began, refusing food, trying to harm herself, generally making things complicated. She seems to trust you, which makes you useful." Sam's mind reeled. "You want me to help you?" "I want you to convince her to cooperate, to accept her situation and stop fighting what can't be changed." Voss's smile returned, cold and calculating. "Do that, and your grandfather lives long enough to see another sunrise. Refuse, and I'll let you watch him bleed to death very slowly." The choice was designed to destroy him, betray Elena, or watch Edgar die. Either way, Voss won, and Sam lost everything that mattered. It was the kind of impossible decision that broke people, that turned them into the hollow-eyed survivors Edgar had warned him about. But as Sam knelt there in the frozen compound, surrounded by armed men and staring into the face of pure evil, he realized something that surprised him. He wasn't broken. Terrified, yes. Overwhelmed, certainly, but not broken. Because Edgar had taught him something more valuable than survival skills or mountain craft. He'd taught him that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible, especially then. Sam stared at Voss, feeling the weight of the impossible choice crushing down on him like an avalanche. Behind the man's cold smile lay the promise of Edgar's death, and somewhere in this compound Elena waited, probably believing Sam had abandoned her just like everyone else in her life. "I need to see her first," Sam said, his voice steadier than he felt. "To know she's really okay." Voss studied him for a long moment, then nodded approvingly. "Smart boy. Always verify the merchandise before making a deal." They hauled Sam to his feet, while two men lifted Edgar with rough efficiency. His grandfather's head lolled forward, consciousness flickering, but Sam caught the slight movement of Edgar's lips, forming silent words. "Don't trust him." The warning came too late. Voss led them to a reinforced building at the compound's heart, past guards who watched with the casual indifference of men accustomed to violence. The interior was divided into cells, actual cells with steel bars and concrete walls that made the mineshaft look humane by comparison. The smell hit Sam immediately: fear, unwashed bodies, and something else he couldn't identify, but that made his stomach clench. "Our maternity ward," Voss said conversationally. "We've found that proper medical supervision dramatically improves success rates." Elena was in the third cell, lying on a narrow cot with her hands cuffed to the bed frame. She looked smaller than Sam remembered, diminished by captivity and terror. Her pregnancy was more pronounced now, her belly straining against a hospital gown that had seen better days. When she saw Sam, her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and horror. "Samuel? ¿Qué estás haciendo aquí?" Her voice was hoarse, desperate. Sam stepped toward the bars, but Voss's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "She wants to know what you're doing here," Voss translated helpfully. "Shall I tell her you came to convince her to be a good little breeder?" The casual cruelty of the words hit Sam like a physical blow. This wasn't just trafficking. This was something far worse, a systematic destruction of human dignity that Edgar's stories hadn't prepared him for. Elena wasn't just a victim, she was livestock to these people, valued only for what her body could produce. "Tell her I'm here to help," Sam said. Voss chuckled. "But that would be a lie, wouldn't it? You're here to help me solve a problem. Her problem, specifically." He gestured to one of his men, who produced a key and unlocked the cell door. "Go ahead, boy. Explain to Elena why she needs to stop fighting the inevitable. Make her understand that cooperation means survival. For all of you." Sam stepped into the cell, acutely aware of the armed men behind him, of Edgar bleeding somewhere nearby, of Elena's desperate eyes fixed on his face. Everything Edgar had taught him about reading situations screamed danger, but he was trapped in a maze with no good exits. "Elena," he said softly, kneeling beside her cot. "I'm sorry. I tried to get help, but—" She interrupted him with rapid Spanish, her voice urgent and pleading. Sam caught fragments, words about time running out, about danger, about something that was supposed to happen soon. Her eyes kept darting toward her swollen belly, and suddenly Sam understood with horrifying clarity. The baby was coming. Soon. "She's in labor," Sam said, spinning toward Voss. "She needs a doctor, a real hospital." "She needs to cooperate," Voss cut him off. "The medical staff we have is perfectly adequate for our purposes, but they can't work with a patient who fights them at every turn." Elena's next contraction hit with visible force, her body tensing against the restraints as pain washed over her. Sam reached for her hand instinctively, offering what comfort he could, but Voss's voice stopped him cold. "Here's what happens next, boy. You convince her to let our people do their job, or we sedate her heavily enough to make her compliance irrelevant. The drugs won't be good for the baby, but that's a choice she's forcing on us." The threat was delivered with the same casual tone Voss might use to discuss the weather, but Sam heard the iron beneath it. These people would drug a woman in labor without hesitation, would risk killing an unborn child to maintain control. "And if she cooperates?" Sam asked, though he already knew the answer would be a lie. "Then she delivers safely, recovers properly, and eventually gets relocated to one of our other facilities. Clean, simple, everyone wins." Sam looked into Elena's terrified eyes and saw the truth she couldn't speak in English. There would be no recovery, no relocation. There would only be another pregnancy, and another, until her body gave out, or she found a way to die. Edgar's teachings about impossible choices suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't about choosing between bad options. This was about recognizing when the game itself was rigged, when cooperation meant becoming complicit in evil. "I can't do it," Sam whispered. Voss's expression didn't change, but something deadly shifted behind his eyes. "Then you've just killed your grandfather, boy. I hope her gratitude was worth it." The sound of Edgar screaming reached them through the building's walls, and Sam's world collapsed into pieces too small to ever reassemble.